There are moments in wrestling that feel like fiction. Moments so surreal, so chaotic, so perfectly timed they seem too cinematic to be real. Last night on SmackDown, we witnessed one of those moments. Roman Reigns, the undisputed face of WWE. CM Punck, the voice of the voiceless, the rebel returned. Together, they stood united. Not as friends. Not as allies. But as survivors of a war they didn't start, two men who had seen it all, carried the weight of companies, titles, egos, legacies. And then the lights flickered. The crowd was already electric. Cameras were everywhere. The tension in the arena could have been cut with a knife. And just when it felt like peace might hold, Seth Rollins and Bron Breakker struck. No entrance music. No warning. No dramatic countdown. They came in like executioners. One moment Roman was talking. The next, he was on the ground, clutching his ribs as Breakker drove his shoulder into him like a missile. Punck tried to react, too late. Rollins hit him with a knee so clean it could have dropped a champion in his prime. Punck stumbled. Breakker followed with a spine-shattering suplex that silenced the crowd. Then the camera caught something that flipped the internet inside out. Paul Heyman. Not shouting. Not running to Reigns' aid. He was laughing. Not a smirk. Not a nervous twitch. A full, knowing, unshaken laugh. Like he'd been waiting for this. And in that moment, everything changed. For fans watching live, it was chaos. For those at home, it was whiplash. And for the WWE Universe, it was a declaration. This wasn't a one-off attack. This was a hostile takeover. Because Rollins and Breakker weren't just lashing out. They were making a statement. They didn't attack nobodies. They didn't pick off mid-carders. They went after the most powerful men in WWE, and sent a message through fists, steel, and broken pride. And the man who once built empires behind the scenes? He stood in the corner and smiled. Let's rewind. Because if you're going to understand what just happened, you need context. You need to understand the fractures in this foundation, how long they've been forming. This wasn't built overnight. It wasn't random. This was pressure. Politics. Ego. Resentment. Legacy. Years of unresolved tension, now unleashed with surgical brutality. Rollins didn't just hit Roman Reigns. He hit his past. He hit the man who once stood beside him in the Shield, who then rose higher than any of them, who became the golden goose of Vince McMahon's empire, while Seth was left grinding in the trenches. He hit the man who became the face of a company Rollins bled for. And Breakker? He's done being the next big thing. He wants the now. He doesn't want to climb. He wants to crush. That's what makes this moment so chilling. It wasn't chaotic for the sake of chaos. It was calculated. And that brings us back to Paul Heyman. The wisest man in pro wrestling. The man who orchestrated the bloodline's dominance. The man who turned Roman Reigns into a tribal deity. Why was he smiling? Because maybe, he's playing a longer game. Heyman has a history of loyalty, to power, not people. ECW? He built it. Then watched it collapse. Brock Lesnar? He made him a monster. Then moved on. Reigns? He fed the beast, kept it dominant, milked it dry. And now? Now he sees a storm rising in Seth Rollins and Bron Breakker. And maybe he knows, it's time to switch sides again. Let's take a moment to ask the obvious, why would Seth Rollins team up with Bron Breakker? On the surface, it doesn't make sense. Seth is a veteran, a world champion, a proven icon. Breakker is a rising star, strong, explosive, but still raw. But dig deeper, and the logic is brutal. Seth doesn't need another run. He needs a revolution. He needs to rewrite the script before it retires him. And Breakker? He needs a breakout. Not by waiting for a shot, but by taking it. By running through the two biggest names in the business and planting his flag on their wreckage. Together, they're not a tag team. They're a movement. A movement against the old guard. A strike against legacy. A violent reset button on WWE's hierarchy. And by aligning with Paul Heyman? They just gave themselves a nuclear weapon. Heyman knows the system. He knows the politics. And more importantly, he knows how to destroy from within. Now, let's look at what this moment really means for WWE. Because this isn't just another twist in the Bloodline saga. This is the spark of a civil war. Seth Rollins is no longer content being respected. He wants to be feared. Bron Breakker is no longer interested in being the future. He wants to be the threat. CM Punk, once the rebellious outsider, just got a taste of what rebellion really looks like. And Roman Reigns? The tribal chief just got humbled. Not by a rival. By his own reflection. Rollins was once his brother. Heyman was once his voice. And now both have turned their backs with chilling precision. If you're a fan, you feel the shift. WWE doesn't just have a new feud. It has a war for control. Raw, SmackDown, title scenes, locker room alliances, everything just got reshuffled. You can expect retaliation. You can expect chaos. But more than anything, you can expect the unexpected. Because the most dangerous kind of heel turn is the one that doesn't ask permission. And Rollins and Breakker? They didn't ask. They just took. And Paul Heyman? He stood in the middle of the flames, and laughed like a man watching his next kingdom rise. This is only the beginning. Over the next few chapters, we'll unpack every layer of this ambush, why this moment changes the trajectories of four of WWE's biggest names. What this means for the Bloodline, for the Shield's legacy, and for CM Punk's redemption arc. How Bron Breakker just became WWE's most unpredictable wildcard. And why Paul Heyman's laugh might be the loudest alarm bell WWE's heard in years. Stay locked in. Because this wasn't a storyline twist. This was a seismic shift. Seth Rollins and Bron Breakker weren't supposed to team up. On paper, they come from different worlds, different generations, different philosophies, different legacies. One is a battle-hardened veteran with years of main event experience. The other is a second-generation wrecking ball, bred for brutality, still climbing his first major peak. But when they walked out of SmackDown shoulder to shoulder, leaving Roman Reigns and CM Punk broken in the ring behind them, one thing became clear: this wasn't about compatibility. It was about intent. Let's start with Seth Rollins. The visionary. The architect. The Kingslayer. Over the years, Seth has rebranded himself more times than anyone else on the roster, not out of insecurity, but survival. He knows how the machine works. He's watched WWE chew up talent and spit it out when it no longer fits the mold. He's seen what happens to people who get comfortable. Rollins never got comfortable. From his days in the Shield to his rise as a solo champion, Seth fought for everything. But there's one thing he never fully had: control. Sure, he held belts. Headline shows. But there was always someone standing above him. Roman Reigns became the chosen one. CM Punk became the martyr. Triple H was the authority. Even when Rollins won, it felt like someone else was pulling the strings. And that wears on a man. Especially one as sharp as Seth. So when the opportunity came to flip the script, to stop waiting and start rewriting, he didn't hesitate. But even he knew he couldn't do it alone. Enter Bron Breakker. A walking wrecking ball. Son of Rick Steiner. Nephew of Scott. A man born into a business that never stops reminding you who your family is. In NXT, Bron was a juggernaut. He didn't win matches, he devoured them. Power, speed, aggression. But what people didn't realize was that Bron wasn't just muscle. He was watching. Learning. Calculating. He saw how the system rewards patience, until it doesn't. He saw how being the future means getting passed over in the present. Bron didn't want to wait. He wanted to strike. And Seth? He gave him the blueprint. Together, they formed an alliance not based on friendship, but on strategy. It started quietly. A few interactions backstage. Rumors of phone calls. Bron showing up to Raw unannounced. Nothing official, just whispers. But the tension was there. You could feel it in interviews. You could feel it in how they spoke, about Roman, about Punck, about the system. Discontent breeds action. And Seth and Bron were past the talking phase. This was about building a new structure. Rollins brought experience. Mind games. Psychological warfare. He's not just a wrestler, he's a chess player, always 3 moves ahead. He knew where to strike. When to strike. And most importantly, who to strike with. Bron brought fearlessness. Raw power. The kind of violence that isn't tamed, it's just pointed in a direction. He didn't need to be convinced. He needed to be unleashed. So when the plan took shape, it wasn't built on chaos. It was surgical. CM Punck was chosen for a reason. Not just because he's a legend, not just because he's loud, but because he represents the voice of rebellion. And for Rollins, there's nothing more ironic than a man who claims to fight the system while still playing by its rules. Roman Reigns was selected for a different reason. He represents the system itself. The chosen one. The face on the billboard. The crown-wearing, belt-holding empire that everyone else is expected to orbit. Seth and Bron didn't want to orbit. They wanted to dethrone. What made the attack so impactful wasn't just the physicality, it was the message. 2 generations, 2 different roads, merging in one violent purpose. They weren't just making a scene. They were flipping the hierarchy upside down. This wasn't about personal beef. This was about leverage. Seth knew that aligning with Bron gave him something he hadn't had in a long time: momentum. Real, unstoppable momentum. And Bron knew that Seth gave him something he desperately needed: access. A seat at the table. Not the one Roman built. A new one. For the first time, Rollins wasn't building for someone else. He was building for himself. And Breaker? He wasn't being introduced. He was being ignited. The chemistry between the two was unspoken. There was no handshake. No forced promo. Just 2 men who knew what they wanted, and were willing to destroy legends to get it. Let's be clear, this isn't a tag team. This isn't a stable. This is a 2-man hit squad with a shared enemy. Stagnation. And that's what makes them dangerous. Most alliances in WWE crumble because they're built on ego. But Seth and Bron are united by contempt. Contempt for the top-heavy politics of the company. Contempt for nostalgia being paraded as dominance. Contempt for the idea that you have to wait your turn. In that contempt, they found purpose. They found each other. And in that union, they found the courage to swing first. Backstage sources say this alliance wasn't scripted. It evolved. Naturally. Organically. Off the record, some writers said the pitch for their pairing was initially rejected, until Seth pushed for it. Until Bron started showing up to creative meetings uninvited. Until the mood shifted from what if, to when? And Paul Heyman? He saw it coming. He didn't stop it. He didn't warn Roman. He watched it unfold like a director watching the climax of his own film. Because Heyman, if nothing else, respects power. And in Seth and Bron, he saw something raw, unshaped, but undeniably potent. He didn't need to lead them. Just position himself where the power was moving. So now we stand at a turning point. Seth Rollins is no longer dancing for the crowd. No more flashy jackets. No more mind games. Just violence, precision, and a plan. Braun Breaker is no longer a prospect. He's a force. A weapon. And now he has a mission. Together, they've shattered an illusion that Roman and Punck were untouchable. That legacies can't be broken. That WWE is still about waiting in line. They didn't wait. They attacked. And in doing so, they just redrew the entire WWE map. Roman Reigns and CM Punk, two names that have dominated WWE headlines for over a decade, finally stood shoulder to shoulder. And for once, it wasn't a clash. It was an alliance. Let that sink in. Because if you know anything about WWE history, you know this wasn't just rare. It was unnatural. Roman and Punck are oil and water. Alpha and alpha. Icons molded from completely different clay. Punck, the outsider who fought tooth and nail for respect. Roman, the golden boy born into a dynasty. Their stories don't run parallel, they collide. So how did we get here? What forced these two to trust each other long enough to become a unit? The short answer? Necessity. The longer answer? Let's dig. It started with the whispers, quiet, backstage noise that something was shifting inside WWE's core. Paul Heyman had gone silent. Seth Rollins was starting to pull strings in places he normally didn't reach. Braun Breaker wasn't just training, he was lurking. There was unease in the air. Roman felt it. Punck smelled it. Roman Reigns has ruled WWE for over 1,000 days. His dominance hasn't just been in-ring, it's psychological. He controls tempo, space, momentum. But even kings know when a rebellion is brewing. CM Punk, meanwhile, returned to WWE after nearly a decade of exile. Not for nostalgia. Not for money. For closure. He wanted to write a final chapter on his own terms. But once he stepped back through the ropes, he realized the landscape had changed, and he didn't control the narrative anymore. So two men who never saw eye to eye started to see the same threat. Rollins had made it clear, he wasn't waiting anymore. The press conferences, the pointed jabs, the refusal to acknowledge Roman as the guy, it all built towards something more dangerous than resentment, action. And Breaker? He was the muscle behind it. The chaos. That's when Roman did something nobody expected. He extended a hand. Not publicly. Not with a promo. Quietly. Backstage. Multiple sources confirmed that a conversation took place, unofficial, off the record, between Reigns and Punck just days before the SmackDown ambush. No creative input. No producers. Just two men with a shared understanding, survival sometimes requires strange bedfellows. Roman didn't have the bloodline at full strength anymore. JUSO had split. Jimmy was unpredictable. Solo was still loyal, but distracted. The Empire was thinning. Punck didn't have a faction. He had a target on his back and no backup. He had spent his return proving he could still hang. What he hadn't proven? That he had allies. And that's the key. Roman and Punck didn't unite because they wanted to. They did it because they had to. Think of it like this, two apex predators in the jungle, both wounded, both proud, both wary of each other. But when the ground starts shaking and something darker approaches, instinct kicks in. For a moment, they don't attack each other. They circle back to back and face the incoming threat. That's what this was. Punck didn't suddenly love Roman. Roman didn't suddenly respect Punck. But both saw what was coming. And both knew neither of them could handle it alone. This was strategic alliance. Pure and cold. And it almost worked. Together, they cut a backstage promo the night of the attack that sent a ripple through the locker room. Not because of what they said. But because of how they looked. United. No smirks. No sarcasm. Just cold purpose. They knew Seth was watching. They wanted him to. It was a challenge. But Seth and Bron didn't come to challenge. They came to destroy. And that's what makes this union so tragic. Because for once, just once, two of WWE's most polarizing superstars saw through the noise. They saw the war coming. And they tried to get ahead of it. They didn't fail because they were wrong. They failed because they were too late. They underestimated Bron's violence, Seth's cunning, Heyman's betrayal. And they overestimated each other. Because when the fists started flying, when the ambush began, when the lights went out, there was no choreography. There was just survival. And in that moment, all the tension came back. Roman, ever the strategist, tried to isolate Breakker and break his rhythm. Punck, ever the fighter, charged Seth with reckless anger. But this wasn't a fair fight. It wasn't supposed to be. This was a setup. A message. And both men were left sprawled on the mat, two warriors who thought unity would protect them, only to realize they'd been outmaneuvered. So what now? Does the alliance between Punck and Roman survive? Unlikely. Sources say Punck was livid post-show. Not at Seth. Not at Breakker. At Roman. He expected backup. More fight. More control. Roman, according to insiders, didn't speak to anyone after the show. No statement. No presence. Just walked out of the arena with Solo at his side and his head down. The partnership might already be over. But what that one moment gave us, Roman and Punck standing together, was something rare. Clarity. It showed that even the biggest names in WWE are vulnerable when the ground shifts. It showed that alliances can form from necessity, not affection. And it showed that respect, even temporary, can't always stop betrayal. Paul Heyman is the architect behind dynasties. He doesn't hold titles. He doesn't lace up boots. He doesn't throw punches. But when chaos erupts in WWE, he's usually the one who whispered it into existence. What happened on SmackDown wasn't just a shock because of the attack. It was who smiled while it happened. Paul Heyman. Standing at ringside. Watching Seth Rollins and Bron Breakker dismantle Roman Reigns and CM Punk, two men he's managed, promoted, and praised. And as they fell to the mat, one after the other, Heyman laughed. Not a nervous chuckle. Not a shocked reaction. He laughed like a man watching a plan unfold exactly as he drew it up. That moment ripped the internet apart. Did Heyman orchestrate this? Did he betray Roman? Had he seen something in Bron and Seth that made him switch allegiances? To answer that, you have to understand one truth about Paul Heyman: he never stands still. He doesn't bet on loyalty. He bets on momentum. Power. Control. Let's track his history. In ECW, he built a revolution out of scraps. He took underdogs and gave them teeth. He empowered nobodies to become legends. But when the business collapsed, he didn't go down with the ship. He pivoted. To WWE. To Brock Lesnar. Heyman turned Lesnar into a myth. The next big thing wasn't just a catchphrase. It was prophecy. Brock decimated legends, and Heyman was there every step of the way. Feeding the fire. Controlling the tempo. Holding the microphone like it was a sword. But when Brock disappeared, so did Heyman, until Roman Reigns returned. And then everything changed. Reigns didn't need a manager. He needed a strategist. A consigliere. Someone who would execute a vision while staying out of the spotlight. And for 3 years, Heyman became the silent core of the bloodline. He whispered into Roman's ear. He orchestrated deals. Managed Solo. Manipulated Jimmy and Jay. He wasn't just Roman's voice, he was his firewall. So why now? Why the shift? Why the smile? The cracks started forming months ago. The bloodline began unraveling. First Jay turned. Then Jimmy flipped. Solo started acting like a lone wolf. Roman's iron grip started slipping. And Heyman? He didn't try to hold it together. He just watched. That's the first clue. Heyman doesn't invest in falling empires. He studies them. And when they start to crumble, he moves on before the collapse takes him down too. And what was rising in the background? Seth Rollins. Disrespected. Overlooked. Tired of being in Reigns' shadow. His matches were electric, his promos gold, but the spotlight stayed locked on Roman. Seth started moving differently, calling out Roman indirectly, mocking the bloodline, refusing to acknowledge the tribal chief. It's because he's listening. If he isn't visible, it's because someone else is meant to be exposed. And when chaos erupts, Heyman is never the victim. He's either the architect or the witness. Let's rewind. When Roman Reigns took his sabbatical after WrestleMania, the WWE machine suddenly found itself with a massive power vacuum. The bloodline had dominated programming for nearly 3 years. Heyman was the mouthpiece, the strategist, the storyteller behind it all. Roman might have held the titles, but Heyman held the plot. So when Roman left, Heyman didn't retreat. He re-strategized. Enter Braun Breaker. Heyman's transition wasn't loud. There were no contracts signed on live TV. No new client reveal. Just appearances. Nods. A few choice words in the right interviews. He didn't even call himself Braun's advocate. He let the audience put the pieces together. Heyman started sitting at commentary during Braun's matches. He gave vague, cryptic answers about the future of WWE and evolution being a violent process. And slowly, Heyman stopped talking about Roman. Stopped even acknowledging the bloodline. He wasn't abandoning his past. He was moving on from it. Because Paul Heyman doesn't manage people. He manages moments. And when he sees a new dominant moment coming, he positions himself first in line. Braun Breaker was that moment. Young. Powerful. No baggage. No politics. No ego, at least not yet. To Heyman, Braun was a blank slate. A vessel. A force that could be shaped into something even more dangerous than Lesnar or Reigns, a hybrid of both. The power of Brock. The pedigree of Roman. The fearlessness of youth. And, most importantly, someone who could be controlled. Or so Heyman thought. But then Cody and Punck happened. And Heyman disappeared. Why? Some believe he ran. That he saw danger coming and backed out to avoid blame. After all, it's easy to be the mastermind when everything goes according to plan. But when the plan explodes, the smartest play is to not be in the blast radius. Others believe he knew it was coming, and let it happen. Because Heyman's strategy is never reactive. It's premeditated. What if the attack was useful to him? What if the humiliation of Braun Breaker was meant to test him? Strip away the aura. Remove the safety net. Let Braun feel pain. Feel betrayal. Get angry. Because an angry monster is easier to control than a confident one. That's the kind of thinking Paul Heyman trades in. But there's a third possibility. One that's darker. What if Heyman wasn't managing Braun at all? What if Heyman was managing the war? Not the people. Not the alliances. The war itself. It wouldn't be the first time. When Brock Lesnar returned in 2012, Heyman played both sides for months, advocating for Brock while secretly feeding Vince McMahon lines. When the Shield rose to power, Heyman didn't interfere. He let it play out, then swooped in once they fell apart. His fingerprints are on every major WWE power shift of the last 15 years. But he rarely gets them dirty in the moment. He waits. He lets the chaos erupt. Then he offers order. On his terms. So let's look at what he gained by staying silent. He saw Rollins, a man who's never been easy to manipulate, get taken out publicly and violently. That creates vulnerability, emotional instability, an opening. He saw Braun Breaker, his own supposed future, get humbled. That creates hunger, rage, a willingness to listen. And he saw CM Punk and Cody Rhodes finally break the system's illusion of control. All without lifting a finger. That's not a loss. That's leverage. Heyman deals in leverage. Always has. ECW wasn't built on money or structure, it was built on chaos weaponized. On desperation channeled into performance. Now, he's watching WWE teeter on the edge again. Roman gone. Rollins shaken. Braun exposed. Punk and Cody united. This is the kind of environment Heyman thrives in. Because when the house catches fire, everyone looks for a fireman. But Heyman isn't the fireman. He's the matchstick salesman. He's not here to fix it. He's here to benefit from it. Some have speculated that Heyman might even shift his allegiance again. That Punk, a former Paul Heyman guy, might be back in his orbit. After all, no one cuts promos like Punk. And no one builds stars like Heyman. But don't count on it. Heyman and Punk have history. But history with Heyman is transactional. Once it's served its purpose, he moves on. Cody Rhodes? Even less likely. Cody doesn't need a mouthpiece. He is the mouthpiece. And his story is too personal, too rooted in family, to ever be handed to someone else. So where does that leave Paul Heyman? In the shadows. Watching. Plotting. Waiting for the dust to settle. And then making his next move once the price of power has dropped. He's not a leader. He's an opportunist. And if Rollins or Breaker think he's going to step in and clean up the mess, they're mistaken. Heyman didn't disappear because he was scared. He disappeared because the war just made him more valuable. The only question is, who's going to pay his price? They weren't supposed to be on the same side. Not ever. CM Punk and Cody Rhodes represent two polar ends of the wrestling spectrum. One forged his legacy by rebelling against the system. The other built his by leaving it, only to return and climb back through it brick by brick. And yet, on that one night, in one shocking moment, they stood side by side, perfectly in sync, fists flying in the same direction. Against the same enemies. The world asked, how? How did these two alpha egos, two deeply stubborn, radically different men, form a unit strong enough to rattle the very core of WWE? The answer lies not in who they are, but in what they've endured. Punk was the martyr. Cody was the missionary. Both bled for belief. Start with Punk. CM Punk is the voice of the voiceless. The man who cracked the fourth wall and called out WWE's corporate hypocrisy in real time, with a microphone in hand and Vince McMahon's sweat still clinging to the ropes. He didn't just walk out of the company. He nuked the bridge on the way down. Punk made himself an enemy of the establishment because he believed the system was broken. And he refused to be another cog. When he returned over a decade later, the cheers weren't just loud, they were vindicating. Fans remembered. So did the locker room. And so did Seth Rollins. Rollins never liked Punk. Never pretended to. On the surface, it looked like professional rivalry. But underneath, it was about territory. Rollins had spent the last 10 years becoming the reliable face of WWE, doing every media tour, every talk show, every title run, every comeback. He was the guy. And now, here came the ghost of rebellion, walking back into the same house he burned down, expecting a hero's welcome. Punk didn't ask for forgiveness. He demanded recognition. And then, there was Cody. The prodigal son. Cody's story wasn't built on rebellion, it was built on redemption. The son of Dusty Rhodes, the ultimate underdog, Cody left WWE not with venom in his voice, but disappointment in his eyes. He wanted more. He wanted legacy, validation, respect. So he went out and built his empire. Created AEW. Elevated his name. And once he had enough weight behind his words, he walked back through the doors of WWE, not to beg, but to claim. And yet, when he returned, he didn't find open arms. He found old guards. He found Rollins. And even though Cody beat Seth multiple times, the respect was never real. Because Cody didn't climb the ladder the traditional way. He skipped rungs. And Seth couldn't forgive that. So Cody and Punck had a common wall to punch through. Seth Rollins. But they didn't connect just because of Rollins. They connected because of the invisible weight they both carried. Expectations. CM Punck was expected to come back and be the savior of WWE's creative soul. But every word he spoke, every move he made, was dissected under the microscope. Every interaction became a headline. Every breath became a hot take. Cody was expected to fulfill the legacy of the Rhodes name. To do what his father couldn't. To finish the story. That kind of pressure doesn't bond men immediately. It isolates them. But over time, it wears them down until they start recognizing the same pain in each other's eyes. They didn't like each other at first. That's not a guess, it's a reality. They've clashed on camera, behind the scenes, and in philosophy. Punck has called Cody a corporate hero in an indie mask. Cody has called Punck too bitter to lead. Neither was wrong. But that's the thing about war, it doesn't require friendship. It only requires a shared enemy. And the enemy was standing in the middle of the ring every week, grinning in Technicolor suits and flaunting a legacy he thought he earned. Seth Rollins. The second unifier? Braun breaker. To Punck, Braun was a hollow future. A product, not a person. A marketing campaign with muscles. The kind of star that gets handed WrestleMania before he's wrestled a summer house show in the middle of nowhere. To Cody, Braun represented every backstage meeting where he was told he wasn't ready. Every creative pitch that got turned down because he wasn't quite there yet. Now the company was handing the kingdom to a kid who hadn't even been tested. So Punck and Cody didn't plan this overnight. They watched. Waited. Compared notes. The first sign of alliance came quietly, during a backstage segment that barely made the final cut. Cody, passing Punck in the hallway. A look. Nothing more. Not a handshake. Not a nod. Just two warriors recognizing each other in silence. Weeks passed. Rumors swirled. Were they aligned? Were they talking? Was there a bigger plan? Then came the SmackDown setup. Seth and Bron, positioned like kings. Paul Heyman orbiting them like a power broker. And the crowd starting to buy it. That's when Cody and Punck struck. Not to build a faction. Not to launch a new group. To send a message. This wasn't about joining forces to win titles. This was about burning down the altar of false idols. The attack wasn't chaotic. It was surgical. Every move felt rehearsed. Every hit had a target. Punck knew exactly how to cut off Rollins' momentum. Cody knew precisely when to step in on Braun. It wasn't friendship. It was chemistry under fire. That's what makes this alliance so terrifying. They don't trust each other. They don't have to. They respect the war. Because Cody knows Punck won't flinch when the heat rises. And Punck knows Cody won't fold under pressure. Together, they aren't united by ego. They're united by a shared refusal to kneel. That's a bond stronger than blood. It doesn't mean they're allies forever. This isn't a tag team. This isn't DX or NWO. This is a Cold War agreement. Let's tear the machine down, then we'll see who's left standing. They're not friends. They're not brothers. They're predators who found themselves hunting the same prey. And right now, the prey is bleeding. The alliance might crumble tomorrow. But tonight? Tonight, it's bulletproof. The crowd in Orlando was loud, not because they expected something crazy to happen, but because it had already been a solid night. Good matches. A few solid promos. The usual rhythm of a modern WWE show, paced to hold attention but safe enough to stay predictable. And then the energy shifted. It was subtle. A lighting glitch during the promo before the main event. Just a flicker. Then a brief distortion in the audio feed as Seth Rollins' music hit. The kind of thing fans brush off as a technical hiccup, until they realize it wasn't a glitch. It was a warning. The segment was billed as a statement moment. Rollins, the veteran world champion, and Bron Breakker, the next big thing, were set to deliver a post-match beatdown on their defeated opponents. A classic dominance display. A platform for Heyman to raise Bron's hand and put the entire locker room on notice. But it didn't happen. Not even close. 9:42 p.m. Rollins and Breakker were in the ring. Standing tall. Rollins was smiling, bleeding charisma. Breakker was hyped up, pacing like a lion in a cage. Heyman stood just behind them, adjusting his tie, prepping to speak. Then the lights dropped. For real this time. Not a flicker. Full blackout. The arena exploded, not in cheers, but in confusion. The SmackDown crowd is smart. They know the difference between a cue and a malfunction. This wasn't an accident. Something was coming. A single spotlight hit the stage. Then silence. Then a sound. Not music. Not Cody's full entrance theme. Just 3 piano notes. Then silence again. Then, Cult of Personality blared for half a second. The crowd erupted. A bait-and-switch. Was it Cody? Was it Punck? Was it both? But no one walked out. Instead, the camera cut to Heyman. His eyes widened. Then he was gone. Not dramatically. Not attacked. Just gone. He dropped off the apron, slid under the ring, and crawled out the opposite side. By the time the camera found him again, he was halfway up the ramp, slipping behind the curtain. Rollins turned to ask where he was going. He never got the answer. Because Cody Rhodes jumped the barricade like a man who had been waiting his entire life for this moment. He didn't walk. He didn't pause for effect. He sprinted. Steel chair in hand. He hit Bron first. Clean across the back. The sound echoed through the arena like a shotgun blast. Breakker staggered forward, but before he could even react, a second chair shot took out his knee. Bron dropped hard, hands reaching for balance, face frozen in disbelief. Seth spun, ready to strike. Too late. Punck was in the ring. No music. No warning. No posturing. Just a running knee to Rollins' jaw that took the champion off his feet. And just like that, the ring was no longer a stage, it was a war zone. Bron tried to push himself up, crawling on one knee. Cody measured him. Then hit crossroads. Punck dragged Rollins up by the hair, screamed something into his face that the cameras couldn't pick up, then lifted him and dropped him with a go-to-sleep so stiff it echoed. The commentary team went quiet. Not pretend quiet. Not dramatic pause quiet. Silent. They had no script for this. Security didn't move. The referees didn't move. This wasn't in the show notes. This wasn't an invasion. It was a message. Cody picked up a second chair. Placed it under Bron's head. Looked at Punck. Punck looked at the crowd. Then at the camera. Then at Seth Rollins, still dazed. And just when it looked like he might do something else, he stopped. He walked to the ropes. Grabbed a mic. But he didn't speak into it. He dropped it on the mat. A mic drop with no words. Cody nodded once. Then they left the ring. No pose. No stare down. No raised fists. They walked out the same way they came in. Quiet, sharp, and unrelenting. The crowd didn't know how to react. Half were screaming. Half were stunned. But no one sat down. Everyone was standing. Phones out. Mouths open. Because in one segment, WWE had flipped the script on every active storyline in the company. This wasn't a heel turn. It wasn't a betrayal. It was a shift in power. The camera stayed on Rollins. He rolled over slowly. Breathing heavy. Staring into the lights. His expression wasn't pain. It was realization. He'd lost something bigger than a fight. He'd lost control. Backstage, it wasn't chaos. It was confusion. Producers scrambled. Talent crowded monitors. Rumors spread instantly. Was this approved? Was this scripted? Was this a work? No one had answers. By the time the show went off air, social media was on fire. Fan footage showed the attack from every angle. Close-ups captured Cody's face, no emotion. Just cold focus. Punck never even smiled. They weren't enjoying this. They were delivering it. Rollins was helped to the back by 2 referees. No stretcher. No ambulance. But when the lights faded out and the arena emptied, you could feel the shift in the air. Something had broken. Not a storyline. Not a character. Something real. The illusion of order. And in WWE, that illusion is everything. The next morning, WWE.com posted a generic headline. Rollins and Breakker attacked in shocking SmackDown ambush. No further details. No follow-up segment. No official statement from Cody or Punck. Radio silence. Except for one thing. A backstage photo leaked, grainy, out of focus. Cody and Punck. Not talking. Just walking side by side down a hallway. Not toward the ring. Toward the parking lot. No security. No gear. Just street clothes. 2 men who had finished what they came to do, and didn't need to stick around for applause. WWE has had plenty of invasions. Many ambushes. Dozens of betrayals. But this wasn't about turning heel. This was about flipping the table. Cody Rhodes and CM Punk reminded the entire industry what happens when 2 men with nothing left to prove decide they've had enough. This was the night everything changed. Not because of who got hit. But because of what it meant. The rules were off. The narrative was theirs. And the war had only just begun. On the surface, the attack was physical. 2 steel chairs. 4 finishing moves. 2 elite superstars left laid out in the middle of the ring. But if you think that was the point, you missed it. CM Punk and Cody Rhodes didn't step into that arena just to bruise flesh or make highlight reels. They weren't chasing a viral moment. This was something deeper, colder, and far more calculated. This was a manifesto without words. A declaration of war written in broken bones and silent stares. The night was planned, not for chaos, but for clarity. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming control. Let's start with what they didn't do. They didn't speak. Not one word. Punck grabbed a mic, stared into the crowd, then dropped it. No pipe bomb. No riddle-filled promo. No hint of a catchphrase or a message to decode. Cody didn't pose. He didn't point at the WrestleMania sign. He didn't pull out a flag or look at the hard cam. He didn't sell it like a moment of triumph. And yet, everyone knew exactly what it meant. This wasn't about explaining the story. This was the story. In WWE, moments usually come prepackaged with meaning. Feuds are spelled out. Commentary tells you who's right, who's wrong. Managers scream exposition into microphones. But this? This was a silent rebellion against all of it. Punck and Cody broke every rule of presentation. They didn't demand the spotlight. They took it, and left before it could follow them out. And in doing so, they stripped away the theatrics, leaving only intent. So what was the message? First, the system failed them. Punck has said it publicly for years. Cody lived it. Both men walked away from WWE when they felt it no longer respected what they brought to the table. Punck left in defiance. Cody left in quiet disillusionment. But the wound was the same: this company only values you when you're controllable. When Punck came back, he tried to play nice. The crowd adored him. Management rolled out the red carpet. But backstage? The vibe was different. Cold glances. Thin smiles. Passive-aggressive promos from guys like Rollins and Breakker who saw Punck as a threat, not a brother in arms. Cody had already lived this movie. When he returned, he was cheered, celebrated, and resented. Even after bleeding in Hell in a Cell. Even after carrying the main event through injuries. No matter how high he climbed, there was always the glass ceiling of perception: you didn't earn it here. So when they stood in that ring together, side by side, it wasn't just about payback for slights. It was about rejecting the entire machine. Because the WWE machine moves in cycles. It builds people up. Then tears them down. Then tells them to be grateful. But Cody and Punck didn't come back to play that game. They came to break it. Second, Rollins and Breakker weren't just opponents, they were symbols. Rollins has become the ultimate WWE company man. He's the star that adapted. Against Roman Reigns and CM Punk, and won. And he didn't just win. He owned the moment. Every second he was on screen, his presence expanded. His timing was lethal. His strikes were crisp. His body language? Calm. Cold. Measured. This wasn't a rookie. This was a predator. And that's what separates Braun from other prospects before him. He's not trying to prove he belongs. He's acting like he already does, and it's the rest of the roster that needs to catch up. Look at the pattern. In one segment, Braun speared Roman Reigns so hard it looked like a car crash. German suplexed CM Punk like it was light work. Stood next to Seth Rollins, completely unfazed. Walked out with Paul Heyman without saying a word. Turned the crowd's stunned silence into a moment of absolute control. That's not luck. That's power. The kind that only a few ever truly carry. Lesnar had it. Goldberg had it. Batista had it. Now Braun has it. But here's the scary part, he's just getting started. Braun Breakker didn't arrive to play second fiddle. He arrived to take over. And whether he's aligned with Seth and Heyman long-term, or just for now, his presence has already rewritten WWE's future. He's no longer coming soon. He's already here. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. CM Punk's return to WWE was supposed to be legendary. Redemption. Closure. A full-circle moment where one of wrestling's most polarizing voices finally got to finish what he started. He walked back through the gates of WWE not with a chip on his shoulder, but with a fire in his chest. And for a while, it looked like he was going to write the final chapter on his terms. But on SmackDown, Seth Rollins and Bron Breakker slammed the book shut in the most violent way possible. And the worst part? They didn't just beat him. They ignored him. Punk didn't take the worst hit. He wasn't the central focus. He wasn't the king whose crown they snatched. He was a side casualty. An accessory to someone else's downfall. And if you know CM Punk, you know that might sting worse than the beating. Let's take a step back. When Punk returned, it wasn't just a pop. It was a moment. Fans cried. Commentators lost their minds. The internet fractured. This wasn't a one-off cameo. Punk was back, and WWE was ready to capitalize. But the industry changed while he was gone. The locker room is younger. The politics are different. Roman Reigns runs a dynasty. Seth Rollins built an empire on work rate. Braun Breaker arrived with steel in his veins and destruction in his fists. And Punck? He was the old wolf returning to a forest full of lions. He tried to fit in. Smiled on camera. Played nice in interviews. But the friction was always there. The moment he walked through Gorilla, people started asking questions. Is he here to work, or to burn it down again? The veterans respected his legacy. The younger talent respected his voice. But not all of them feared him. Especially not Seth. Seth Rollins has always had issues with Punck, some real, some professional, all deeply personal. The jabs in interviews weren't character. They were unfiltered heat. Seth saw Punck's return not as a triumphant homecoming, but as a threat to his position. Punck may have walked back in expecting to reclaim a spotlight. But Seth never planned on sharing it. And then came SmackDown. Punck stood beside Roman Reigns, an unspoken alliance. The veteran rebel and the tribal monarch. They weren't friends. They weren't aligned. But for one night, they faced a common storm. Only it wasn't a storm. It was a premeditated execution. When Seth's knee cracked Punck across the jaw, the symbolism was clear: your voice doesn't matter anymore. Punck barely got a shot in. Before he could react, Braun tossed him like dead weight. There was no promo. No stare down. Just punishment. And when it was over, Punck didn't yell. He didn't fight back. He just lay there. Wide-eyed. Dazed. Betrayed. It wasn't a physical defeat. It was a spiritual one. This is a man who walked out of the business because he was tired of being used. Tired of being talked over. Tired of being overlooked. And now, years later, after surviving AEW meltdowns, media scrums, backroom drama, and fan division, he walks back into WWE, and the same thing happens. He becomes an afterthought in a war he wasn't allowed to lead. And that might be the most brutal blow of all. Sources backstage say Punck left the building without a word. No handshakes. No meetings. Just silence. One producer reportedly said, "He looked like a man who just realized the business hasn't changed, it's just moved on." And maybe that's true. Because the version of WWE that Punck built his legacy fighting against, the machine, the politics, the favoritism, it's not the same. Now, the machine runs without Vince. The politics are evolving. The throne is no longer guarded by legacy. It's guarded by who's willing to take it by force. Punck has always believed in speaking truth to power. But now? Power doesn't care about speeches. Power shows up in boots and throws spears through your ribs. What comes next for Punck is unclear. Does he fight back? Challenge Seth? Try to expose Heyman? Or does he disappear again, this time for good? One thing's certain, Punk's aura is shaken. Not by defeat. But by irrelevance. And that, for a man who's always prided himself on being the conversation, is the cruelest loss of all. For over 3 years, Roman Reigns stood at the top of WWE like a colossus. Untouched. Unchallenged. Undisputed. He called himself the head of the table, and no one dared question it. Not John Cena. Not Brock Lesnar. Not even the company itself. But every reign ends. And for Roman Reigns, it didn't end with a title loss or a WrestleMania defeat. It ended with silence. The moment Braun Breaker speared him in half on SmackDown, and Seth Rollins stood over him, mic in hand, declaring, "Your kingdom just fell," you could see it in Roman's eyes. Not fear. Not rage. Just realization. That moment was the crack in the armor. The myth split down the middle. Roman wasn't invincible. He was isolated. Let's break this down honestly, the bloodline is fractured. Jay walked. Jimmy flipped. Solo is distant. And Paul Heyman, the one man who always whispered the plan, laughed as Roman got dropped. Roman was never supposed to fall like this. His run was built on dominance, not vulnerability. He controlled every narrative. Matches ended when he said they did. Opponents were systematically dismantled. Title defenses became processions. Every glance, every word, every match was part of a carefully managed empire. But even the most disciplined empires fall from within. The moment Heyman didn't rush to Roman's side, it became clear. Roman was no longer the center of gravity. And it stings worse than a clean pinfall. Because this wasn't about the belt. This was about identity. Roman Reigns created a god-tier persona. The tribal chief. The head of the table. The alpha of the alpha. He transformed himself from a rejected top babyface into the most compelling, layered, dominant force in WWE. But now? He's surrounded by ghosts. The Usos are gone. His family is splintered. His enforcer is distracted. And the man he trusted most. The wise man, left with his enemies. So what is Roman without his bloodline? Is he still the tribal chief, or just a man in a broken crown? The scene backstage after the ambush said everything. Roman sat slumped in a steel chair, shirt soaked with sweat, chest rising and falling like a man who had just been through a war. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't pacing. He wasn't even speaking. He was processing. For the first time in years, Roman didn't look like a ruler. He looked like a man who had just been dethroned, and couldn't decide if he should fight to get it back or let the throne burn. Reports from insiders said Roman refused medical help. He waved off trainers. Solo Sikoa stood nearby, stone-faced, silent, unreadable. But Heyman? Gone. Not a text. Not a call. Not a word. And Roman felt it. He didn't need to be told what had happened. He saw it. The betrayal wasn't in a promo. It was in a smirk. In a glance. In a walk away from the wreckage. And it left him alone in the rubble of what used to be the most powerful faction in modern wrestling. This isn't just storyline drama. It's a reckoning. Roman has to face a terrifying truth: he didn't lose the war. He never saw it coming. He ruled from a throne built on family, trust, and fear. Seth and Bron didn't bring an army. They brought clarity. They showed the world what happens when someone stops playing by the rules of royalty and starts swinging with purpose. Now Roman stands at a crossroads. Does he rebuild? Call back the pieces of the bloodline? Reunite with Jimmy? Forgive Jay? Reinforce his empire with desperation? Or does he evolve? Does he drop the tribal god persona and start again as a warrior? Not a king. Not a mouthpiece. Just Roman. That's the question everyone's asking. Because the world watched a dynasty collapse. And when dynasties fall, they don't usually get rebuilt. They get replaced.